My father looked me dead in the eye, with half the town watching, and said, "Only important people are invited, not you." The room went silent, my chest locked, my hand pressed against the coin my mother once gave me, and for a moment I was 19 again, the girl he never thought was enough. My name is Marcelina Dupree, Colonel in the United States Air Force, and that night, in the middle of my father's birthday celebration, the lie he had told about me for years finally shattered. The Spanish moss hung heavy over Charleston streets as I slipped quietly into the Legion Hall. The chatter of neighbors, old friends of my father's, rolled like static under the glow of buzzing neon. He was 75 that night, and the place had been dressed up for his glory, sheet cake sweating on a plastic table. The mayor seated up front, the high school coach shaking hands like a politician. I didn't come to stay. My plan was simple. Leave an envelope with a feed store gift card and a short note, then disappear before anyone noticed I was there. My dress blues stayed folded in the bag slung over my shoulder. I had almost reached the donation box when his voice cut through the room. Loud enough for every ear to catch, sharper than it needed to be. "Only important people are invited, not you." The words didn't just land. They stung like a whip. A few men laughed too loudly. Others shifted in their seats, pretending they hadn't heard. I stood still, my throat tightening, that old familiar weight pressing against my chest. For a moment, I heard my mother's voice, the soft reminder she'd whispered years ago. "Don't let your father make you small." But the air in the hall pressed hard, and instead of answering him, I did what years of training had drilled into me. I swallowed, nodded once, and said flatly, "Copy." I turned toward the door, pulse racing, fingers curling around the coin I kept in my pocket, the one that always steadied me before a hard step. Leaving without a scene would have been easy. Disappearing had always been my escape. But just as I reached the edge of the hall, a gloved hand caught my shoulder. I turned, and there she was, General Teresa Whitaker, silver stars gleaming cold and bright under the tired neon. Her grip was firm, her eyes steady, and her voice carried clear across the silence my father had left hanging in the air. "Ma'am, this way." The sound comes back to me the way some memories do, sharp, ordinary, unforgettable. The tap of a spoon against my mother's chipped teacup, her soft hum filling the kitchen before sunrise. That tiny rhythm was the heartbeat of the Dupree house, even when the rest of it felt cold. At the dinner table, my father's eyes never searched for me. They followed Graham, his golden boy, every time he ran the ball across the high school field. Dad would slap his back, grin, and say, "That's my son," when I wrapped bandages around sprained ankles on the sideline. He would glance at me and smirk. "Helpful work, but the important stuff's out there." His voice always cut, but it was my mother who patched me back together, reminding me that quiet work counted too. When cancer hollowed her out, I sat by her bed, the smell of lemon soap clinging to the sheets, her hand frail in mine. She whispered the words I've carried ever since. "Do what's right, even when nobody claps, and never let your father make you small." She slipped away with those words still warm in the air, leaving me with the weight of them. Afterward, my father cleared the house of her like she had been clutter, boxed up her china, her baking tins, even the pie plates she adored. I found them once in the cupboard, dust layering their surfaces, as though erasing her presence could erase the proof of who she was. Even now, wearing a colonel's rank, that memory sears. To him, I am not an officer, not a daughter who carried out the promise my mother asked of me. To him, I am still the one who walked away. That truth stings more than the insult he hurled in front of everyone. The morning of his birthday, I sat in the rented room's silence, coffee cooling in my hand. When my phone buzzed, a message lit the screen. "Ray, I'm heading back from the base, passing through Charleston tonight. Can I see you? T. Whitaker." My first thought was to ignore it. The less time I spent near that Legion Hall, the less chance I had of hearing my father's voice slice through me again. I wanted to slip in, drop my envelope, and disappear. But it wasn't just anyone reaching out. Teresa Whitaker had been my compass for 15 years. Through deployments, field tents, and the kind of nights when the weight of blood on your hands never really washed away. She was the one who once pulled me aside after a brutal tour and said, "You need to put in for the commission," and then slid the paperwork in front of me when I doubted myself. She had been there at every hinge of my career. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, every part of me torn. To see her meant risking being seen. Still, I typed back, "I'll be in the lobby at the Legion, briefly." What I didn't know, what would change everything, was that she wasn't coming empty-handed. In her bag, tucked between official seals and folded orders, was the paper authorizing my promotion to colonel for public announcement. Alongside it, a letter prepared that very morning, laying the foundation for something even more unexpected. The Evelyn Dupree Memorial Scholarship. The Legion Hall glared under tired neon, the kind of light that made cheap balloons look sad and sheet cake sweat on plastic. A long table sagged under paper cups and punch bowls, while the so-called VIPs, the mayor, the high school coach, the bank manager, held court at the front row. I kept my head down, envelope in hand, aiming for the donation box near the door. It would be quick, silent, the way I'd learned to move through this town. But my father's voice cut across the room, sharpened for an audience. He stepped forward, smile plastered on like it had been rehearsed. "Only important people are invited, not you." His words cracked against the walls, bouncing through the hall. The laughter that followed was thin and brittle. A couple of men coughed into their fists. Others pretended to strike up conversations, eyes darting anywhere but at me. My chest tightened, breath shallow, the coin in my pocket digging into my palm. My mother's voice rose in my head, steady as always. "Don't let him make you small." I wanted to answer, but the old reflex won. I turned on my heel, choosing the quiet retreat, ready to vanish before the sting settled. My fingers touched the door handle when a gloved hand pressed firmly onto my shoulder. I spun, startled, and there she stood, General Teresa Whitaker, dress blues crisp, 4 silver stars glinting under the flicker of neon. Her eyes swept the room once, then anchored on me. Her voice rang out, calm but commanding. "Ma'am, this way." The room froze, as if someone had sucked the sound from the air. Every eye locked on us, Legion caps tilted forward, the mayor's hand fumbling with his tie, the coach's mouth falling open and closing again without a word. General Whitaker's grip on my arm was steady, unhurried, as she guided me down the aisle. Each step felt less like walking and more like a procession, the weight of her presence forcing the whole hall to witness. From the corner, Paula, my old friend from the clinic, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Ray!" she whispered, eyes wide. The ripple spread. An elderly veteran stood, removed his cap, pressed it to his chest. No one told him to, but within seconds others followed, chairs scraping as people rose to their feet, silence deepening. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught my father's face. His grin faltered, jaw twitching, lips trembling with the effort of holding composure. Beside him, Graham's cheeks burned red. He stared at the floor as though it could swallow him. Then Whitaker did something I hadn't expected. She slid her hand into her jacket and drew out a folder stamped with seals. She leaned toward me, her voice low enough to catch only in the hush. "Tonight, some truths can't stay quiet." She turned to the microphone, her tone rising with the kind of authority that could command a battlefield. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to announce that Marcelina Dupree has been promoted to the rank of colonel in the United States Air Force." Gasps broke the silence, followed by a stunned murmur rolling through the hall. She went on, her words steady. "And today, the City Council has approved the Evelyn Dupree Memorial Scholarship, honoring her mother's legacy." I didn't have to look to know what my father's face showed. For years, he'd spun his story about me, the daughter who never measured up, the one who didn't count. And now, under the tired neon of his own birthday celebration, the lie shattered. He stood exposed, pale and rigid, while the truth finally claimed the room. The hum of the old air conditioner rattled through the silence, the only sound left in the Charleston Legion Hall. General Whitaker set the folder on the podium, her gaze sweeping across the room like a searchlight. Her voice was steady, deliberate. Marcelina Dupree has been promoted to colonel in the United States Air Force, recognized for her leadership in medical campaigns and humanitarian missions. From the back row, I heard it. An audible gasp. "My God!" the mayor whispered, unable to keep it contained. All eyes flicked toward me, then back to the general, as if waiting for permission to believe what they had just heard. Whitaker lifted her hand, and Jenna Alvarez, a school board member, stepped forward clutching a yellow folder. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. "Tonight we also announce the creation of the Evelyn Dupree Memorial Scholarship for the children of military families." She held the file up like an offering, the weight of my mother's name suddenly alive again in that room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people tapped the tables in a quiet rhythm, a kind of unspoken agreement that the tide had shifted. I caught sight of Paula nodding to herself, lips pressed tight like a prayer answered, but my father sat frozen, color draining from his face. His fingers drummed the rim of his glass too quickly, water sloshing at the edge. Graham hunched beside him, eyes glued to the floor, his silence more telling than any defense. Whitaker's voice cut clean through the noise. She pointed at me, then let her gaze sweep back to the crowd. "This is not the story her father has told for years. This is the truth." The room stilled, the whispering cut short, and in the hush that followed, no one dared look away. Whitaker reached down and lifted a black velvet case, opening it with quiet ceremony. The light caught on silver wings nestled inside, an eagle insignia, sharp and gleaming. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "By tradition, the family places the first insignia. Mr. Vernon Dupree, would you join us?" The hall seemed to lean forward as my father rose. He moved stiffly, his limp more pronounced than usual, his head turning left and right as if searching for someone to step in, to release him from what waited. But no one moved, not a friend, not an ally. He reached for the insignia, and his hand betrayed him. The tremor was unmistakable, the same shiver I'd seen years earlier when he carried a casserole dish after my mother's funeral, trying to look steady while everything inside him was breaking. The sight pierced through me, equal parts ache and reckoning. He forced a smile, lips twitching. "Well, he muttered, but the words rasped out, stripped of their old swagger. The room didn't echo him, it just waited. With painstaking care, he pressed the eagle into its place inside the frame. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The silver caught the light, straight and undeniable. The hall held its silence, every gaze fixed on him, on me, on the truth now visible in metal and velvet. And in that stillness, I understood. This wasn't just my promotion. It was the public unraveling of the power my father had clung to, the story he had controlled for decades, collapsing in plain sight. After my father pressed the insignia into its place, the hall seemed to sag under the weight of what had just happened. The silence was thick, almost unbearable. General Whitaker didn't try to fill it. She stepped back with quiet dignity and passed the microphone to Reverend Miller, who stood at the edge of the stage, Bible resting against his chest. His voice was low, plain, the kind of tone that sinks deeper because it doesn't demand attention. "Teach us, Lord, to honor the quiet work, even when no one claps." The words settled over the room like a blanket, gentler than the tension, but heavier too. From the corner, a trumpet lifted, 3 clear notes, pure and short, cut through the air before the musician lowered the instrument again. The silence that followed was louder than the sound itself. Somewhere behind me came the sound of a stifled sob. I turned slightly and caught sight of Paula, my old friend, her hands pressed to her face, tears slipping through her fingers. My chest tightened, not from shame this time, but from the knowledge that someone finally saw me for who I was. Then the first veteran rose. He was frail, shoulders bent, but his hand lifted his cap with all the steadiness he had left. He pressed it to his chest and held my gaze. Others followed. Chairs scraped, boots shuffled, and soon row after row stood tall. Caps came off, hands to hearts. And then the applause began, slow, uneven, but building until it filled every corner of the hall. In that swell of sound and reverence, the years of silence cracked apart. I realized this was bigger than me. It wasn't just recognition of my rank or my service. It was an entire community rising to correct the story my father had told for decades, to admit, without words, that they had believed him too long. And now, they were giving the truth its rightful place. By the time the last plates were stacked and the band packed their instruments, the hall had emptied into the Charleston night. The neon sign outside flickered weakly, casting tired light through the windows. Inside, the air was still, and for the first time all evening it was just my father and me. He stood near the corner of the stage, the velvet box clutched awkwardly against his chest like a shield. His jaw was tight, eyes darting anywhere but toward me. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, stripped of the booming certainty he had used all night. "I never said you weren't important." I felt my spine straighten, the words I had been holding back for decades rising sharp and steady. "You did. You said, only important people are invited." That wasn't a misunderstanding. Dad, that was your sentence. The silence between us grew taut, filled with years of things neither of us had ever said. He cleared his throat, trying for his old showman's tone, but it cracked in the middle. "Maybe we should take a picture, post it on Facebook, show folks we're good, that everything's fine." I almost laughed, but it came out as something harder, colder. "I'm not performing anymore. If you want to make something right, start by not turning me into a punchline every time you get nervous. Stop making me small so you can feel big." His eyes flickered with something, guilt. Maybe. Or the realization that the room that had once echoed his voice no longer belonged to him. He looked down at the box in his hands, then back at me, lips parting like he might reach for one of his practiced lines. But nothing came. For the first time in my life, my father had no words to climb onto, no laughter to ride out the tension. And in that stillness, I felt the shift. The balance between us had finally tilted. I was no longer the daughter fighting to prove her worth. I was simply myself, standing on ground he could no longer take away. The next morning, Charleston was hushed under a pale sky. I walked through the family cemetery, boots pressing soft against the damp ground. My mother's headstone waited beneath the red canopy of a maple, her name carved simple and steady. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the coin, worn smooth from years of being held through every hard moment. Kneeling, I placed it gently on the stone. "I didn't let him make me small. Mom." A breeze stirred the branches, scattering leaves in a soft cascade. From somewhere across the cemetery came the faint call of a trumpet, the kind of sound that carries memory with it. I closed my eyes and smiled, certain she would have nodded in quiet approval. When I turned to leave, I caught sight of a boy in a crisp JROTC uniform, standing still, watching me. His salute was sharp, eyes wide with something like reverence. I returned the gesture, a lump in my throat. In his face, I glimpsed the truth that would outlive me, that worth never needs permission to be recognized. The following morning, in a corner booth of a diner that smelled of coffee and griddle smoke, General Whitaker sat across from me. She stirred her cup once, then said, almost casually, "Revenge isn't fireworks. It's standing tall where you were told to bend." I nodded, warmth settling deep in my chest. The story was finished. I had taken back my place, not by shaming him, but by standing in the truth he could never erase.